What's up, everybody? It's Dakota, and today we're going to be going over a deck that's been kind of giving the top decks in the format some fits and things like that. Bant Spirits is the perfect example of a clock plus disruption plus a clock in Pioneer, and able to beat things like the Dimir Inverter decks, the mono white Devotion decks, and Lotus Breach, which are arguably probably the three best decks that you can be playing in the format. Before we dive into Bant Spirits here in a second, just make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. You're going to see more Pioneer videos, more modern, more standard, and things like that. All the formats are really sweet. Really excited and to go in depth on a lot of decks that are just showing up in the format. They either look really cool or just really powerful, and this one's kind of a little bit of both. So really getting into Bant Spirits, basically you're a blue-white aggro deck and you're splashing green for Collected Company. As you can see, like, your 32 creatures in the deck. Starting with the 1-drops, like, you have Mausoleum Wanderer that gets bigger the more spirits you play. It gets +1/+1 until end of turn whenever a spirit enters the battlefield under your control, and then you can sacrifice it to counter target instant or sorcery spell unless its controller plays X, where X is Wanderer's power. Just the fact that it's like an aggressive, it's a 1-mana 1/1 flyer that essentially just like gets bigger, and like you can blow out your opponent by like flashing in a spirit and then sacrificing it to make them pay 2 when they thought they were going to pay 1, and things like that. Spectral Sailor is a flash flyer that can eventually just draw you cards in the late game. Playing 24 lands in the deck, you're very likely to hit 4 lands. You want to really cast like Collected Company and things like that. But also, if you like hit Spectral Sailor, you can eventually just like draw an extra card and just hold up, threaten activating this or like flashing in another spirit if need be. For as far as like 2-drops, Rattle Change is like probably your best 2-drop. 2-mana 2/1 flash flying. When it enters the battlefield, a spirit gains hexproof until end of turn, and then you can cast spirits as though they had flash. So this card does a lot because it can protect like your other spirits and things like that. You can play it. You can play it at the end of your opponent's turn on turn 2 as like just a 2/1 flyer, or you can use it as like a protection spell for like say a Deputy Detention that has something underneath of it, or a Spell Queller that has like a spell that you really don't want your opponent to resolve, and you can kind of blow them out that way, just by putting this 2-power flyer into play. Puts more pressure on them, blanks another one of their cards where they have to have another answer for one of your threats. Also giving your spirits flash, getting the flash in like a Selfless Spirit or even like a Supreme Phantom and things like that, which are both like really powerful cards and are probably your best cards aside from Rattle Chains. Being able to flash in a Lord at instant speed is really good because you can like blank some of your opponent's like damage-based removal, like playing like Wild Slash and things like that. Like with a Mausoleum Wanderer, they try to slash your Wanderer, you can flash in a Supreme Phantom, and it becomes a 3/3. Then takes 2 damage, and your opponent has to have another like Wild Slash or like kill it in combat or things like that. Selfless Spirit gives creatures you control indestructible if you sacrifice it. Really, really powerful in a world where people are playing like Anger of the Gods or Sweltering Suns or even like Supreme Verdict, things like that. It just protects your whole board, and also gets extra utility when you just flash it in because of Rattle Chains. 3-drops, I guess Brazen Borrower is like technically an honorary 2-drop as well. Just being able to disperse something back to your opponent's hand, and then also have a 3/1 flyer at the ready. Technically not a spirit, but it does a lot, and it's akin to just putting a lot of pressure into play. A 3-mana 3/1 flyer is definitely a fast clock when your opponent really can't block it effectively or find efficient ways to like deal with it when it comes to like your other threats that you're playing. Deputy Detention, while also not a spirit, it is a 3-drop. It is a creature version of Detention Sphere that you can hit off of Collected Company, which gives it a lot of utility and a lot of what you want to be doing, which is like tempoing your opponent by either countering their spells, taking their permanents, and things like that, and just beating them down and putting a clock on them, forcing them to have to like stop you instead of you focusing on like stopping them. Empyrean Eagle gives your other creatures with flying +1/+1, and it turns out that like all of your other creatures fly except for Deputy of Detention. So this is essentially just a lord for all your other general flyers and things like that. Nebelgast Herald, a 3-mana 2/1 with flash and flying, but when it enters or another spirit enters the battlefield, you can tap a creature an opponent controls, which is another way you can like tempo your opponent out, where if they're trying to go wide and block you, Nebelgast Herald off of a Collected Company plus like another spirit, like Rattle Chains or something like that. You really just kind of like you tap down like 2 of their creatures, and then like you play another spirit on like your main phase, tap down their last creature, and then you just get in for tons and tons of damage. You can also do this before attackers and like tap down their creatures, so then it's hard for them to obviously get in damage when you tap down their 2 best threats, and then also allowing you to get in for a ton of damage as well, while also being able to leave up permission plus other spirits to flash into play to then like tap down your opponent's creatures. Finally, probably the best like 3-drop, and one of the reasons like play spirits in Spellqueller, another flash flyer that can exile a spell with converted mana cost 4 or less. It doesn't counter it, so like Supreme Verdict does get like countered essentially by Spellqueller, although your opponent does get to cast the card without paying its mana cost. And interesting thing people were trying to do before people really like dove into like spirits and things like that, playing Spellqueller in blue-white with Teferi, Time Raveler, because if you bounce Spellqueller with Time Raveler and your opponent has a spell underneath of it, they actually won't be able to cast the spell due to how Teferi is worded. And for Collected Company, round out the deck. Again, hits like all the other spells in your deck, except for like the other 3 Collected Company, obviously. But just a really good card. Gives you a lot of value. Like I said, there's some piles where you get like Nebelgast Herald and Deputy Detention, or you get like Deputy plus like Selfless Spirit or something like that. You can take their best permanent and then like sacrifice Selfless Spirit in response to like a Wrath and all these kinds of things, just to put like a ton of power into play and put your a lot of pressure on your opponent. Land base pretty simple: Botanical Sanctum, Breeding Pools, just a lot of untapped blue sources, 4 Glacial Fortress, 4 Holler Fountain, some islands, some plains, and some Temple Gardens. Really essentially maxing out on like the untapped blue sources and the untapped white sources. Obviously playing some of the basic lands, because Field of Ruin and decks like that are definitely a thing, so just having those untapped blue and white sources are really good. And you're really only playing green for the Collected Company and the Dromoka's Command and Tyler's Tracker in the sideboard, so having all those like more untapped green sources when you already have basically the free blue sources, along with like the green mana base, makes having any more than green white duels unnecessary. So the sideboard, Declaration in Stone is an efficient removal spell, deals with a ton of creatures, and as long as they're non-token creatures, for each non-token creature exiled this way, they investigate, which means that they make a clue. Really good against like tokens and things like that, because obviously they don't get to make clues. Just dealing with like some of your other opponent's threats very efficiently, and exiling them also really good. Giving them a clue really doesn't matter. Dromoka's Command, basically like this will let you like counter a Anger of the Gods, like preventing the damage from like an Anger of the Gods or a Sweltering Suns, or the card that people are playing a lot of, which is Hour of Devastation, which like ignores Indestructible and deals 5 to everything. Like this just prevents like the damage from an Hour of Devastation. Also, making your opponent sacrifice an enchantment, being able to put a counter and fight on your opponent's thing. I think counter fight is probably the most used mode on Dromoka's Command, because it just gives you so much value of just like killing a blocker with like your biggest spirit, putting a counter on something else, and then hitting for a ton of damage. Remorseful Cleric, good against the graveyard decks, also a spirit, so you can flash it in with like Rattle Chains. Cost less than 3, so you can hit it with Collected Company. Rest in Peace, more graveyard hate. Just probably the premier piece of like graveyard hate in the format, besides Leyline of the Void, but you want to be able to actually cast your spells in this deck, since there isn't a good way to like filter those draws. So Rest in Peace gets the green light there. Tomic stops your opponent from playing lands and land cards from being the target of spells or abilities your opponent controls, and your opponent can't play lands from their graveyard. I'm not exactly sure what this stops, but like the 2/3 flyer for 2 that kind of gets pumped by the rest of the team is pretty good, and maybe it's for more aggressive things. I'm not exactly sure, but if someone could tell me, that would be great. Deputy, another collected company target. Getting into the trials, really hard for your inverter opponent to deal with, when inverter truth is the only thing that really attacks very well, and Gideon can just shut it down with his +1. So it just makes him really hard to beat, especially when he emblems, and your opponent has to deal with getting into the trials while you're also putting pressure on them, and then they can't combo. Mystical Dispute just gives you a lot of tempo, and that's kind of what this deck focuses on, is like tempo and efficiency. And Mystical Dispute is probably one of the premier sideboard cards in blue right now, just because it hits so many like the good cards in the format. And then finally, one Tireless Tracker. Again, another good collected company target. If you flood out, like, it eventually just gives you cards that you can draw later by giving you clues. And then if he sticks around and you get to crack like a few clues, then it's like a must answer threat that your opponent really has to deal with, that is just going to keep getting bigger and beg for your opponent to at least throw 1 or 2 creatures in front of them. And that's Bant Spirits in a nutshell. Really powerful, probably like the best tempo deck that we have in the format. Just plays a lot of flash things, gets to hold up its mana like every turn cycle, and basically gets to be flexible when holding it up. Like, it can play creatures to be aggressive, it can play them to like blow your opponent out with like the removal spells and things like that, which is really cool and a fun way to attack the format. There's some people that are just messing with like blue-white, and there's some people that are playing Bant. I think Bant Spirits gives you like the most utility and things like that, and gives you the high impact and the greatest chance of like coming back on a board where you're either slightly behind or where you're trying to get ahead and things like that. So I hope you guys enjoyed this deck. Be sure to check it out. There's like tons of videos I know on YouTube of people like playing this. I'm going to be looking into getting a like Mana Traders account or whatever, and just like renting some of these decks and playing them as well, alongside like the deck text and things like that. So if that's something you'd be interested in, please let me know in the comments of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed this deck tech of Bant Spirits, and I'll see you in the next one.